Thank you for participating in the 10th Annual BlackStar Film Festival. We would like to thank our funders and individual donors, as well as our network of producing and community partners. The runtime for this program, Coral Messam in conversation with Jasmine Johnson, is 60 minutes, including audience Q&A. Please leave your questions in the comments, and we'll do our best to engage with them. Please follow us on all social media platforms at BlackStarFest and use the hashtags BSFF21 and BlackStar10. Don't forget to fill out our audience evaluation and vote for your favorite films. We hope you have a wonderful time during the 2021 BlackStar Film Festival.
Welcome everyone to the 10th Annual BlackStar Film Festival. It is the last day of the festival. I can't believe we're already here. My name is Farah. I am the panel producer here at BlackStar, and it's my pleasure to introduce you to these bright lights in the field of movement work, performance, and diaspora. Jasmine Elizabeth Johnson is a visiting assistant professor of dance at Princeton University and an assistant professor of Africana Studies at the University of Pennsylvania. Her work explores the politics of Black movement, including dance, diaspora, travel, and tourism. Her first book is the forthcoming Rhythm Nation, West African Dance and the Politics of Diaspora, and her second book is A Cultural History of Black American Dance. Movement Director Coral Messam creates worlds through bodies on stage and on screen. Her award-winning film and television work includes Small Axe, Lover's Rock, directed by Steve McQueen, and I May Destroy You, written and directed by Michaela Cole. She continues to create work that is grounded, inspiring, and thought-provoking. Her stage show, called Run It Back, is a production that celebrates Black British rave culture and gets an opportunity to be remounted this year after being brought to a halt by the pandemic. Jasmine and Coral, we are honored to have you.
Good morning, and thank you so much, Farah, for that really sweet and generous introduction. It's a privilege to be here in conversation with you, Coral. And Farah, thank you for everything to gather us and organize us. We appreciate you immensely. Coral, there's so much for us to talk about. And so I want to be specific with my question asking, but also capacious enough, right, to kind of hold whatever arises through conversation. And part of the beautiful difficulty of thinking about some questions for this conversation is because, like, your career is so long and storied, with I think 25 years in the industry and so many different roles that you've had across that time, thinking about moving from dancer to actor to choreographer, intimacy coordinator, choreographic, there's just so many different aspects. So I'm wondering if we might, just to begin and open up, knowing that it's by no means ever a linear transition when we go into these new jobs or capacities of directing. But could you talk a little bit about the transition from choreographer to movement director? What impacted that? And what would you say are the substantive differences between choreographer and movement director?
So first of all, thank you, Jasmine. Good afternoon, everybody. Or good morning, should I say. It's afternoon in the UK. So the answer to your first question, because there's two questions there. So, so with choreography, obviously the difference between choreography and movement directing is choreography is mainly based on devising dance steps and choreographing lyrical routines primarily. And movement directing is where you're focusing on those dance steps, choreography, and a scene, but you're also looking at characterization of a character or an actor. So you're embodying the world of the theatre piece or the film. So it's vast in regards to the scope. Sometimes as a movement director, you're choreographing and movement directing. And sometimes those two things merge because they sort of fall in sync, right? But my journey from choreography to movement directing, I mean, I didn't even know there was a thing called movement directing. Nobody really knew. And it's still a new thing that people go, oh, what's movement directing? What is that? And, you know, you have to explain yourself. But there are many movement directors now. For me, it happened very organically, like you said. I was in a theatre show in 2009 at the National Theatre. And it was a show based on the book by Wole Soyinka, Death and the King's Horseman. And there were some dance scenes that were traditionally West Yoruba tradition. And that, because of my experience as a dancer, I could bring some of those elements to the production. And plus we had a consultant who I knew, Peter Badajo, that had that expertise. So when I did the show, I was asked to become dance assistant. And then I was like, oh, this is interesting, because I'm working with actors that don't necessarily have dance experience, right? They didn't come from, you know, contemporary ballet, jazz, social dance. It was actors embodying movement. And so I'm thinking, well, actually, isn't it part of the same thing? The difference is you've got tools and techniques when you go to dance school. With acting, you're embodying a character. And I was really interested on those two synergies. So I began as a dance assistant, and then slowly, word of mouth, you know, in this industry, people ask you, oh, could you do some movement or some choreography for this theatre production? And I was already doing it. And then when I went back to study as an actor, I did a movement module, part of my studying, and it was movement in acting. And I was like, oh, this is something I'm already doing in my work practice. But I didn't know it was an isolated thing that you could actually go out and learn as a practice and become a movement director. So that was the first thing I learned. I'm like, oh, okay, this is very different to choreography then. It just goes deeper, it's vaster, you know, because you're also affecting how somebody speaks, how somebody functions in that world, particularly if you're looking at historical and contextual period scenes or period films or period theatre. You have to sort of the research goes deeper. So the journey or the map is, it can take you on a different journey, where with choreography, you know, it's changed a lot now because they merge, right? But when I was starting out, it was very separate, and it was like, oh, okay, how do you sort of function those two worlds? And the advantage I had is that I also had experience in physical theatre. What does that mean? So physical theatre is really telling stories, but also adding speech, text, as well as dance, as well as movement. And I had that experience in my sort of toolbox, so to speak. So the transition from choreography to movement directing was kind of seamless, quite fluid.
Yeah, thank you for that. There's so much fantastic vocabulary, I think, for all of us inside of that. And I want to particularly we're going to come full circle back around to it, your language around tools and techniques versus embodying a character. And I have just a number of questions about how you were able to do that so beautifully in Lovers Rock and elsewhere. So thank you for that. I was watching I think a 2020 interview that you had done, and there was a moment toward the end of it where I think that the interviewee asked you something around Black dance and kind of what you thought about that term and whether or not you thought that was a helpful term. It was like maybe like it was BAID interview. Do you remember?
Yes, it's my friend. Absolutely. Sorry. It's my friend Jared Martin. He's a dancer and sometimes choreographer, and he set up this platform. And so yes, I do remember that well. That was during lockdown. So
it was helpful. It was so helpful, and I found the questions to be really rich as well. So there was this moment where you were asked that question, and I loved your answer, because part of you'll tell me whether or not this was actually your language, but part of the point that you were making was around like the actual language of Black dance not being capacious enough to actually hold how vast, in your language, universal, how deeply global Black dance is, right? Like the reality is that what we think most culture is rootedly Black in many ways, right? That it's everywhere and it's very hard to hold. So on the one hand, there's this kind of universality of Black dance, meaning it's everywhere. And in your language, I thought was really helpful. You said we use and abuse it. And then we also have some other language of yours about the kind of specificity of Black Britishness, and how much that kind of specific upbringing, cultural context, and heritage deeply informs your work and your approach to your work. So I wondered if you could talk a little bit about kind of Black Britishness, if there are kinds of sensibilities in terms of, you talk about your dad being a sound man, kinds of different household contexts, but is there something specific about Black Britishness that kind of informs or shows up in both of your choreographic work, but also I think more broadly, your kind of approach to movement directing and intimacy coordinating as well?
It hasn't always been that way. It's always, I mean, I started as a contemporary ballet dancer. That was my thing. But I absolutely believe that being Black, being from the West Midlands, being British has definitely had an inspiration, or has inspired more so now. It's kind of come full circle in the work that I do, particularly with Run It Back, because that to me is sort of like a thank you letter to my culture, to my parents, to my family, my upbringing. It is a thank you letter. So I lost some of the questions that you were asking about Black British dance or Black dance, and what does that mean in terms of Black British culture or dance in general?
Well, yeah. I think so. And also, this kind of, it's not necessarily attention, but I think it is maybe something worthwhile to think through, the kind of globality of Black dance in many ways, but also the reality that like we're also specifically rooted, right? So when we say Black dance, whatever that means, that has everything to do with where we are, right? Our particular geographical coordinate, the time in which we emerge. So I guess I'm just wondering if there's anything about kind of the specificity of your upbringing or cultural context that may inform your work, or maybe even like a specific kind of work like Lover's Rock, for example.
For sure, definitely. So first of all, I think when we use the titles Black dance, I think sometimes it can be abused and it can be used as a really great thing. I think it's this thing when people say ethnic minority, like we've got this thing in the UK, they come from ethnic minority backgrounds. And I kind of go, it's really global majority. Let's be real.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? Global majority. And I think that's such a much more delicious title because it's inclusive. It includes everybody, and we're massive. So when sometimes I hear these titles, Black dance, Black, it's even, I use Black British rave culture, but that I'm specifically talking about what the experience is in the UK that I've experienced. But when we talk about global dance and we say Black dance, I think it has to be more like global majority. Global, it's global dance. It's global. You know what I'm saying? And sometimes I think when we call it Black dance, it gets pigeonholed, and I'm like, nah, that's just too small for what we have experienced, what we are experiencing in the world. It's like hip hop, right? You can't put that in a little, hip hop is global too. So so that's kind of where I sort of have my question mark around that label. With regards to my upbringing, my work has definitely been influenced by my upbringing. My dad actually wasn't a sound man. He played records. So maybe I was probably talking about my brother when he was a bit of a sound guy. He DJ'd back in the day. And so typically growing up, I remember, my Sundays were, the tradition in my house was my mum would go to church. My dad would be doing some of the cooking. My mum would come back helping with the cooking. And then records were playing at the same time. I remember Dennis Brown literally blasting out the house from the living room. Then you had the kitchen, then you had the garden. And I remember being out in the garden and hearing Dennis Brown, There's a Hole in the Bucket. And that just really, I remember that still stays with me. I was probably about 10, 9 or something at that age. But those moments, those little vignettes of memories stick to me today. But my dad played records. That's what we did growing up. He just played records. My brother played records on a Friday because he would DJ on a Saturday night and practice his set at home when my dad and my mum would go to the pub. So that was just tradition. So I think from a cellular level, from growing up as a kid, it was just in my cells. Before I could even call it a thing, it was like something I did as a kid. You just dance in front of the TV, you dance in front of your family, or it's just part of the social makeup of my upbringing, which I know that's a global thing, right? You have your cookouts, you have your barbecues. Here we have our blues parties, our house parties. So there's a symmetry there. I think for me, if I think about going on to Lovers Rock, to me that was a gift. I mean, it was a gift because I got to work with one of my heroes, which is Steve McQueen, which I was very happy that was just like a dream come true. But also the fact that we were able to kind of revisit a world that we both could relate to. And I was a bit young then, back in those days, to kind of experience those dances. I wasn't that old, you know what I'm saying? But my siblings went to those dances. My dad played some of those Lovers Rock songs, on a Sunday evening or a Sunday afternoon. So those songs were sort of played quite frequently in the house. And that story went sneaking out at 12 o'clock or 1 a.m. in the morning. That was really common. My brother snuck out the house and went through the back window and came home at 4 a.m. You know what I'm saying? That was common. That was common practice. So when you're kind of being able to create a world that you can see yourself and you can experience that memory again and revisit these experiences that was actually created by the youth of the UK. These kids that sung those songs, like Karen Wheeler, Janet Kay, Louisa Marks, rest her soul. These were young kids. They were like 15. And they were the epitome of the radical movement that was happening in the UK. Because obviously it was very dub reggae based, very male based. And when Lovers Rock came through, it was like, it's a love letter to themselves. These kids were talking and singing about love at such a young age. One singer, forgive me, I can't remember her last name, Sylvia, can't remember her last name. She talks about writing these songs when she's at school. She's actually she's just like literally in the bathroom or in a class and just writing lyrics when she's supposed to be doing her work at school. Like this is the influence of Lovers Rock, because the girls back then wanted to be, Motown was there. Okay, if Motown is doing that, we're going to have our Motown for us, because that's what they aspired to, and they wanted to have that, but UK owned. This is us, this is our voice. Let's create this. So these young kids were just creating this movement and also intimate. To be intimate at that time when the world was so against you as a Black person, as a young kid, and you're fighting the system when your parents, on the other hand, are saying obey the system when the system isn't really addressing you in a respectful way. So what are you going to do? So that's why Lovers Rock is so precious, because it's a love letter to themselves, and it's where the youth of the 70s were birthed. This is, marriages came out of these parties, children came out of these parties. I mean, it's just a gift. So Lovers Rock is always and always will be very special to me, for sure.
Thank you so much for that. Thank you so much. I'm going to just be in rhythm of what you just said and move some of my questions around, because you've already evoked so much around intimacy. And I wondered if we can talk a little bit more about that. I mean, something so huge and also specific like intimacy. And even when I'm thinking about Lovers Rock, which I just rewatched, thinking about like intimacy is proximity, right? Like both in the kitchen, prepping the food before the party, like intimacy in terms of like closeness, waiting for that long bathroom line, the intimacy of the dance floor, the intimacy between the movement and the music, also that kind of forced closeness, right? Of that moment of sexual violence, right? That like there are all of these different iterations of closeness. And I think all of these different kinds of different questions around consent too, right? Like who we decide to be near, what constitutes family. There's just there's so much there. So I guess my question is just maybe how you've come to think about and conceptualize. I don't necessarily mean abstract, but conceptualize intimacy so much so that it's something that you can kind of direct. Like what, I guess what's held inside of that world for you, and maybe what is the relationship between intimacy and dance for you?
That's a really great question. Thanks for asking that, Jasmine. It's a really great question. I think with Lovers Rock, I think so I break it down. So the way that was approached was, okay, I've got a group of 20-year-old actors or 20-something-year-old actors that don't know anything about Lovers Rock. Okay, maybe their parents know some of it, or they can talk about it, but they actually haven't experienced it. And now we're in a 21st century world where no one really is intimate, more so than ever now. You know what I'm saying? So I'm like, okay, so I had to break these dances down. I had to ask my peers, my siblings, family and friends, community, talk to me about these dances, because I remember them from 80s, 90s. You know what I'm saying? When I was allowed to go to the club back in those days. But then it was a different, because obviously it was fresh. It was the frequency was very live. So I had to break these dances down. So I actually employed an associate to be my partner, because I was not rubbing up on some of these young kids. There's no way I was doing that. I'm a grown-ass woman. There's no way I'm going to be demonstrating with these young boys that just like, you know what I'm saying? So there we go, the intimacy line, you have to draw it. So I had to have someone who's the same age as me to be an example, because it's literally showing them how to do some partner work. You know what I mean? It's a duet. How do we dance intimately? And what was important, and Steve said this too, is like the consideration of Lovers Rock is what he wanted to bring the lens to. The consideration, the tenderness of Lovers Rock. That was really important to him. That's really important to me too. Because those songs are so tender, they're considerate, you know, they're very special songs. So, for example, we broke down the dances. I put some reggae on and we're like, let's just do some rock steady, you know, and that could have been like 2-step, double step, single time, double time, and bubble. Even just bubbling, just doing this with your shoulders, you know, just that alone. If you can't begin to feel and taste that texture, you're going to be in trouble, because the songs have got so many layers to it. The bass, the treble, the drum kit, the melody. There are so many layers to it. And it's just, you have to really get that quality, or not quality, really begin to feel and understand the frequency to a level where you should be singing these songs like you know them. So part of their homework was to learn the dances. Well, part of the work was to learn the dances. Also, to be considerate with your partner and to understand it's the symmetry, because it is like it's lovemaking, but in the driest form. And how do you get young people who have 20, 25 to become intimate at such a level? So they had to kind of reverse the role, right? And what was so beautiful about that is that they said to me, wow, we don't move like this anymore. We don't move like this. What's going on? We don't know how to move. Because even if you go to Notting Hill Carnival, if you see a guy or a girl approach, well, it's normally a guy approaches a woman, right? If you're talking about heterosexual relationships, it's that sense of like, oh, okay, where does the permission come into it? So, for example, with Lovers Rock, you know, and that doesn't mean whether you're heterosexual or homosexual or whoever, because obviously there were blues parties that that men went to that you know that were gay. So these parties happened in all in all sexualities. So it wasn't like an uncommon thing. But the idea is when you approach someone to dance with them, the idea that you go from elbow and you go down to the wrist, and that's telling somebody kind of, you don't have to say, would you like this dance? That You didn't have to say, you don't say that. The music's blasting, you can't say that. So it's a physical, it's not a verbal communication, it's a physical communication. So your verbal communication is this: let's go. You know what I'm saying? So also there's little details, like if a man had asked you to dance, not asked you, but physically did that and held you in a weak way, if you held your wrist in a very sort of like limp, kind of like, you're not going to dance with that man, because you know that it's an indication of how that dance is going to go, right? But if a man asks, the way he holds your elbow or your arm or caresses you is an indication to know how that dance is going to go down. So it's all about the touch. So all those physical communications are so vitally important, and I think they're so rich in how we communicate with each other. It wasn't always like that, obviously, in these dances, but what Steve wanted to, obviously, like I said, wanted to focus on was the tenderness and the consideration of the dances, because obviously these dances would get quite highly sexual. And then there were some men that would ask women to dance and they said, no, I don't want to. And then it would get quite violent sometimes, you know, that you would refuse a man to dance. And some of these men were grown-ass men asking some young girls to dance, you know, because some of these girls are like 15, 16, going to big people's clubs or big people's parties. So it's a real, I mean, I'm only speaking from some of my experiences. I can't speak for everybody's experience. This is a keyhole within an experience. It's not speaking for every person's experience in Lovers Rock.
Yeah.
But going back to the young people, that was how I began, is learn the dance, go away and learn the songs. Even if you've got to listen and sing the lyrics, sing it. Because when you sing it, it's going to be an internal experience and it's going to be in your cellular level. So you become that, you become the song. So when so when it comes out, you got to pull up, rewind that tune. You know what the lyrics are before the song's even been played.
Which I think is, I mean, that one moment, which is such a testament to the efficacy of both you and McQueen and everyone who was a part of that, of the silly games, and when the music drops, right, that everyone who's present can immediately pick up and not just occupy the lyric, right, but still be in middle of that sway, still be inside of that slow drag, right, and to be able to carry that musicality was just such a very weepy moment, at least for me watching, the kind of beauty of that, that community formation. You know, one of the things, and this is partly informed because I did just recently watch a film that is part of the festival, Uprooted, which Farah told me I would enjoy, and I very much did. It had me really thinking about it's a kind of a trajectory of jazz dance and what that means, and you know, who we consider to be the fathers or mothers of jazz dance, and how that is troublesome in many ways. And you know, toward the end, we kind of get to these questions around the commodification of dance, and particularly Black dances, and you know, how what emerges from the community, what emerges from the vernacular or the social, becomes somebody's technique, right? When Black dance becomes kind of choreographic inspiration for someone, but the Black community doesn't get cited for that kind of really the labor, right, and creating that. So as old as time. So it had me thinking, though, about like the dance film. And I'm pretty, you know, admittedly US centric in my thinking around this, but you know, thinking about Chicago, for example, or, you know, dance competition films, or La La Land, right? Where like everything is really on the 8 count. And it's a very specific idea of what constitutes a dance film. But after I saw Lovers Rock the first time, I was like, oh, this is a dance film, right? This is a dance film. Because it's getting at these kind of different textures and kind of mundanity of Black life, right? These like different vibrations of how dance emerges and the intimacy that comes with that. So part of what I wanted to ask you was how how you already gave us so much language around intimacy, but I'm wondering, when you think about dance and choreography for film rather than for stage, is that an important distinction for you? I was watching some of the rehearsals for King Lear, and people were talking about, you and the folks who were in it were talking about the kind of physicality of medieval movement and, right, like all of that intention behind that. I'm wondering if there's a different way that you approach thinking about movement, thinking about choreography for live audience versus the cinematic, which we know has historically so often flattened the kind of texture and intimacy of Black dance.
Again, really lovely question. I think first and foremost, I approach every project with fluidity, because I have to be very open. I have to be like an open vessel. So it's not so interesting. I think it is. I think it's, well, obviously the rehearsal is different in theatre compared to film. So obviously in theatre, it's a very organic process, because it's a real journey that you're there you're there quite a lot of the time. You're working together from day one to day whatever. Where with film, you're coming in sometimes halfway through an episode, or halfway through a season or a block. Do you see what I'm trying to say? So sometimes it's quite tricky because you're not there from the get-go, and you're stepping in and then you're stepping out, and then you don't come back to that for maybe like another couple of weeks or another 3 months or whatever. So you just kind of, so the journey is very different to theatre and TV. In terms of my approach, I think it depends, because all my projects are never the same. They're never the same. Sometimes it's an historical and contextual project where I have to kind of go, okay, I've got to research this dance and put this together, put it on film, send it to the director or send it to the AD, and they say, okay, I'm happy with that. And you've got literally like half a day to spend time with the essays and the actors to get this down. Where in theatre, you kind of have a bit more time and space to kind of like shift and change and edit and fine tune things, because you're there from the get-go. You've had these conversations from the get-go. Yes, you do have those conversations with TV, but it's much more instinct. It's much more instant, and time is of the essence. So I think the journeys are very different. However, with Lovers Rock, as much as I didn't have a lot of time, I think what was the advantage of that, it was something I could relate to. It was something that I could connect to, and it was something that I was so invested in such a real way, because it was reflecting my culture, it was reflecting my upbringing, it was reflecting the things I've experienced as a young kid, or the things that my siblings had experienced. I'm kind of helping to tell their story too. So the journeys are always very different. It's really hard to compare them, actually. But I think the most contrast is with film, the time is shorter, and it's you've got to have this now. Although it doesn't mean it doesn't take any less of the quality of work. You just got to just be really quick. Where with theatre, you've got a sort of an umbilical cord from the very beginning to the very end to press night, and you're there throughout that whole journey. Where with TV, it's like whoop, boop, 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 boop. It's just a different musicality. You know what I mean? The rhythm is really different, because it's not constant with TV.
Yeah. Well, while we're thinking about the stage in some ways, maybe this would be a great time to talk about Run It Back. And what it's like directing your own thing. Maybe if you'd be willing to share with us some of the curiosities inside of the work. If there are any kind of questions that are at the heart of it, or just any kind of broader considerations that you're exploring with the cast through this piece.
Sure. Well, first of all, Run It Back was created in 2018. And I'll tell you the story of how I met Michaela Cole. I've heard of Michaela Cole, but I hadn't met her in person. She came to the last night. The show was sold out completely. She came to last night. She loved it. And she said, that's how I got involved and I May Destroy You. But anyway, that's how that came about. That relationship came from that. Run It Back was, I wanted to make, like I said, I didn't necessarily want to become a director per se, but I wanted to create this work. I wanted to create something about music. I wanted to create something that reflected my upbringing in terms of like a teenager to young adulthood, growing up and raving and carnival, and just these lovely micro memories, or not memories, but experiences. They're macro to me, but on the level of the industry, they kind of become micro because it's obviously my culture, right? And these conversations become micro because it's my culture, right? These are bathroom chats and kitchen table talk and things that you talk with your friends. And I wanted to macroize. I've just made up a word. I wanted to bring those to the bigger scale. I wanted this to kind of go, yeah, this is how it's gonna. This is what I'm talking about. And I think I'm so glad I did, because I wanted to celebrate us in a very, and what I mean by us is people of colour, our Black British rave culture, what was birthed here, what got me in dance in the first place. It wasn't because I wanted to be a ballet dancer or contemporary dancer, because my dad played records on a Sunday when I was a DJ. So these songs, tunes I grew up with, and when I go clubbing, I was like, yes, you know, when Soul to Soul came through, that was such a shift in trajectory of how we saw each other as Black people. We could be really bold and loud. And there was the place called the Africa Centre in London Covent Garden, which is nowhere. It's not there now. It's moved to London Bridge. But that was the epicenter of Black music, Black culture, African culture. It was a diaspora for all of us. And when Soul to Soul and Jazzy B, and we saw people with locks, and we were like, what? This was like, so all these things in terms of fashion, music was part of it kind of shaped my work. And I think Run It Back is, for me, is the epitome of what I want to say as a movement director, choreographer, director. This is the work I wanted to make. And I wanted to and it's also passing the baton on to the youth of going, listen, this is what we've created. We created sound system, we created reggae, lowest rock, jungle, drum and bass, grime. It's all there, bashment. I want you an Afrobeat. This is yours. Take the banner and run with it. Because if it wasn't for sound system, we wouldn't have any of these musical genres. We wouldn't have them. They wouldn't exist. So it's almost like saying thank you to my past. Some of my past, I still like to rave now and again. But also to kind of pass on. Be proud of this, because I tell you, I think also during the time we were making Run It Back, I went to Notting Hill Carnival. So that was August 2018. It was pouring of rain, the worst. Never will do that again. Pouring of rain, Notting Hill Carnival outside. Never will I ever do that. But as I'm there, I'm seeing a group of young men, and a bashment tune comes on. We're at a sound, I was with my friends, and a bashment song comes on. And he's flipping between different music. He's playing hip hop, bashment, grime. But there's one particular, and I think they're a bit intoxicated, but this is what I'm talking about when we have to really take responsibility for our experiences. Is when I see someone twerking to every single genre, I'm like, this is what I'm trying to say. Like, and we don't go, stop, hold on. Whining is different to twerking. Let's be real. When a soca comes on, that doesn't mean it's not twerking. Whining is a particular art. It's an art form. It's a skill. Because what are we saying about people that were born in Barbados, or that created soca, or you know what I mean? So it's like, well, it feels like it's okay. Yes, a soca comes on, let me twerk. Okay, a hip hop song comes on, let me twerk. Okay, it's got its place, but not in every single genre. So my argument is, these guys were circling up. They were circling because something was magically happening between them. And you know, we create that circle when we just kind of dancing and we just spinning each other in space. We create that circle naturally, right? And then if somebody wants to come in and interject and begin to twerk in that circle. So I just said, hold up. I just had to say, stop. This is not your time. This is not your time. This is not a twerking circle. they're doing something specific, and you have to respect and honor it. And that's when I had to say, no, this is why I had to run it back, because people have to understand that soca is whining, bashment is whining, but there are different dance styles in particular to these different music genres. And I think it's important to understand where this thing comes from. It's like twerking in Lovers Rock. Like, no. It's like daggering in Lovers Rock. Hell no. And that's what, that's, so it's like, let's just kind of break this thing right down, because I think it's important that we have those distinctions within the culture, for sure.
Yeah.
Because it will get lost. It will get lost.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, the rigor of the forms, right? And the kind of intimacy between the movement and the music, and to be able to say, that these index different kind of histories and legacies, right? So there's a certain kind of respect that one,
yes.
I mean, I hate to say ought, but maybe, right? A regard maybe. That's
life.
A word that, yeah, right?
Life. It's a life force. It's a life force.
It. Yes.
Yes.
Yes. I'm the language of regard is something that has been kind of bubbling for me throughout this conversation, because it seems like, you have language of like a love letter, a thank you. Like there seems to be so much care and deliberation inside of the work that you make, which I think is really important and really crucial, right? For work to be a thank you, for work to be a love letter. We just so rarely hear that. In a previous conversation, so one, I'll just say that if folks do have any questions, that this to just think about it and to please offer them, and we'll have some time toward the end to respond to them. So if you have a question on your heart, please ask it in the chat. So one of the things I wanted to ask was related to part one of a conversation that we had in preparation for this conversation. And there was one moment in that where you talked about the question of like dancing, maybe responsibility to music that might ultimately be harmful, right? Music that might be homophobic, music that, is charged in particular kinds of ways. And I'm not sure if that's something that's actually like a central consideration and run it back necessarily, but it's something that I've been thinking about independently and reignited with your language. So I guess my question is dancing consent? Is dancing for you a certain kind of like necessarily a consent to the lyrical that's playing? Are you trying to treble that, or have us think just more about it? Where are you at on that?
Yeah. So again, Run It Back is also dealing with some of those issues, as much as it's celebrating Black bodies, unsanitized. What I mean by that is we're not policing anything. So within the show, we deal with the joy of seeing Black bodies. We're seeing ourselves, enjoying ourselves in our whole entirety. But also, I'm probing the question, and going, what are we saying here? When we look at homophobia in bashment, which is danced by the LGBTQ as well as straight people, they still dance to it because they say we love it, but it doesn't love us back. So I'm asking that question, why doesn't it love us back? And it's still there, but they'll dance and rock to it like it doesn't hurt them. There's also the misogynisticness of misogyny in our music, and and the N-word troubles me. Now I know this is very different in America. And I think in the UK, it's just, and I think it's also it's a heritage thing, because obviously my parents are Jamaican. I'm Jamaican heritage, so the N word to us is just like, nah, nah. It just doesn't really kind of rock with us. So the N word in songs, and it's only now I've started to really began to hear it, particularly and somebody I was talking to about this, that I think, and I could be wrong here, that it's kind of had an influence on the West African culture in regards to Afrobeat, that the N word will appear in songs, and also bashment too. Only the last maybe 10 years or so, or longer, I'm not sure, but just I'm seeing it seep in to songs now. But I know it's in hip hop a lot, but I don't know if there's reasons for that, which I can't comment on because I'm not African American. But I'm really interested in the notion that we love the music, the bass line will get us. Like, for example, Buju Banton, when he sang Boom Bye Bye, that song, although it's banned now, you don't really hear that tune. I remember dancing in the club and going, well, you know, I was just I was there. When, but not even hearing the lyrics, but getting seduced by the tune, right? And sometimes I think what's interesting, that tunes can really seduce us. But what are we actually dancing to? What are we actually consenting to? What are we actually allowing us to think and do? And it can do that. Music has that way of just getting us in, making us feel good. But hold on now, that tune's telling us to kind of like, mash up a girl's vagina or beat up a man that's gay. Like, what? So I'm just saying, what are we saying here? So I'm really interested in those notions of like, oh, okay, see how it can get us? And then as soon as you hear the lyrics, I'm just asking those questions. What are we doing here? And also daggering for me is interesting because there's two sides to it, right? If you go to Jamaica, daggering is for some women and for some men, is a livelihood. So you can't turn around and say, well, you need to stop daggering because it's so wrong and misogynistic, because you're taking food out of their mouth. This is how they make their living. Some of these dancers and entertainers, that's how they make their living. And then the upside to it is, well, who's gaining the higher hand here? Because women are the passives and men are just jumping on them, and sometimes women are jumping on men too. So when does it become consensual? I sometimes think there's a drunkenness in that consensualness, and that's when the blurred lines come through. It can get quite blurry. You hear stories, men have just literally harmed their genitalia from jumping from a tree onto a woman. I've seen men grabbing up a chair to throw it across the room because they're so in the moment of daggering that women are running the other direction. And I'm just interested, where do we draw the line? And I'm not saying it, I'm just probing these questions, and I think that's what I'm interested in, is I'm probing the questions like, where do we draw the line? How do we get from Lovers Rock, which was such a considerate, tender dance, which is obviously influenced by the music, to literally hardcore, you know what I mean? Like literally daggering someone's backside, like, and literally bending somebody up in a way that does not feel, what I look at it, because I'm coming from, and this is what I'm trying to say, I have to be very careful here, I have to be very careful where I'm coming from, because I'm coming from a Black British perspective and not necessarily a Jamaican perspective. So I can't really judge, but how I can actually say how it makes me feel as a woman. How does that make me feel as a woman? I can say that. And this is what I'm trying to say, is when I was at Carnival, the last time Carnival was, this is what I'm talking about how we don't need to take responsibility for our culture. Because when a young guy came up to me and started to try and dagger behind me, and I say, hold on, no. You're not doing that. Are you crazy? Don't you know how to whine? Yeah, I'm whining. Yeah, this is what. No, that's not whining. That is daggering. There's a difference. Excuse me, there's a difference. And this is what I'm saying. We don't know the differences. Why do we not know? Because we're just thinking, we get drunk on the tune, we just get drunk on it. Not, with liquid, but on a sort of visceral level. And I'm just probing the question. I'm just probing the question. Where do we go from here? The N word in particular, like, is that okay? Is it still okay? I don't know. That's a whole bigger conversation, I'm sure. There's probably people listening thinking, but yeah, like, because the thing is, it's like, the British term is, well, you can call yourself the N word and you're going, yeah, man, da 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 da. But why are you not saying Sambo? Why are you not saying Gollywog? Why are you not saying Black Samba? Why aren't those words as equal to the N word? Then I'd understand. You got a point, but I don't quite understand how that glorifies, I don't know. It's just something I haven't quite settled with yet, and I don't think I ever will.
Yeah. Thank you. Unfortunately, everything froze on me, so I tried to quickly return. I think I got the meat of what you were saying, and it actually kind of brings us back in some ways full circle to thinking about intimacy. That, like, proximity is not the same thing as closeness necessarily, right? That, like, there's a different kind of texture of intimacy that actually might require consent, right? We might describe the kind of this kind of slow wine or the lover's rock as being intimate in a way that we would not maybe use the language of intimacy to describe that moment of attempted sexual violence, right? That, like, that being close is not necessarily the same thing as being together, right? And I think being more literate in the ways that you're inviting us to be, challenging us to be in some of these dance forms is really important to know the difference. There's a question that is being raised in the with our broader community that is around actually the language of consent. And the question is, can you speak about consent given what I don't know if the you is you or me, but just mentioned about the dance being a sexual experience. In some ways, I think you named got to that in some ways, but do you have any other thoughts on consent in dance?
I think it's really, I think it's interesting, isn't it? Because I think the culture that we live in now reflects how we connect with each other, as in music, as in the way we function socially. More so than ever, we've probably become so disconnected due to lockdown, due to COVID, and also the consent of touch, because we're not just talking about, is it okay for me to touch you? You're asking, can I touch you because do you have COVID? There's all these things now we have to think about, you know what I'm saying? That's why we don't have Notting Hill here in the UK, because people are scared in case, because obviously the virus could increase. But I think it's important for women particularly to no, I think not so much women, because we don't need to be, I think it's men that need to be in a way taught how to know what those lines are, to just kind of like have some thought when you approach somebody to dance, not grabbing, not holding, but just have some mindfulness, because dance should be fun. Dance should be consensual. If it's not, then you're not dancing. It becomes something completely different. That's a whole different thing. But if I think I really wish now, come to think of it, I really wish Lovers Rock was taught in schools, because I think not just for our culture, but I think for everybody as young bodies, or bodies in general, to learn how to just be tender and considerate and to connect, to hold someone's hand, to touch, all these things, because we haven't been able to touch and feel for some people anyway, for a year and a half, right? So I think to reconnect, to hold somebody, to just to be held. I mean, there's known that it's this really phenomenal, oh God, I forgot his name. He's a music artist and actor. He's in a film called Burning an Illusion in the 70s, a very well-known UK actor. He's brilliant. And he's part of the Lovers Rock movement. His wife is Janet Kay, who sang Silly Games. His name's just gone out of my head. That's so awful. And he talked about when he used to go to Lovers Rock dances, he said it's scientifically known, psychologically known, that we didn't really get love in some households. They didn't get love, that connection back home, because, through culture and circumstances, we didn't really get held by our parents. So to be held by somebody in a dance for that period of time, you just had the endorphins set you up to feel happy and joyful in yourself, because it was like, I think it was healing. It was completely healing to be touched and to caress someone, or to be caressed by somebody else, to feel that loving touch is such a healing place to be. And I think even now, I think we kind of need that more so than ever. I think I've digressed a little bit here, so I do apologize if I have.
No.
But I think Yeah, because I don't think it's really interesting, isn't it? Because I'm trying to think of the dances that require these days partner work in regards to the modern day dance. I mean, I can't think of any on top of my head apart from daggering. That's the only dance where I can think, oh, it requires two people, or maybe four people and one person. Do you know what I mean? Can you see my hand? I've got delay. So imagine you've got this one, say I'm going to give you this one woman, and used to have another person, and that would be an intimate thing, right? Now you've got one person, one woman, and four men, five men sometimes on one person. Because this I remember seeing a video, and we deal with that in Run It Back, where a man has to be, and it's a joke thing. I mean, they see it as a joke thing, but it's actually a real thing, where a man gets his entourage to back him up to whine with a woman. Can you believe this? When I heard that, I was like, are you kidding? Like, where, seriously, grow a pair. You know what I'm trying to say? Like, when you need an entourage to go and approach a woman, and it just tells us something about our culture, right? It tells us something. And it's also the reverse is that, well, if you're not a good dancer, that means, you know, women are asking, if you're not a good dancer, that means you're not good in bed. So these kind of pressures that are put on as human beings is really interesting, I think. I think it's really complex. I do.
Yeah.
I think it's very complex. But in terms of dance styles, I don't think there are really dances that kind of demand courtship, or because music has shifted. I just don't even think that clubs, do they have, you had your slow ones, your slow dances, and the end of the night you'd have your slow jams, and that would require you to dance with somebody. I mean, I don't think they do that before lockdown. I don't think they were even having that set in terms of the music sets that they would have at the end of the night. Okay, all right, lovers, let's get on the dance floor, let's slow it down. Those traditions, I think, are really important, right? Because you're dancing, you think of the set, right? You're dancing, having a great time, you've got your peak, yeah, it's all good, it's all fire. You're relaxed, and by the time those slow jumps come on, you're really chilled that you can actually go and approach or go and dance with one person. And that's sometimes how first dates happen. So I think some of that could be brought back for sure.
Yeah, yeah. You just brought me back to high school. It's literally the last time where it's like, all right, all you, all you couples, just but it would be like one song, and it would just be typically very awkward. But like all the things all the promises that dance potentially holds, right? Like in many ways, it's a rehearsal for sex in some ways, by all the ways that we impute who or what a person can do based on how their certain kind of self-possession of the body. It's oftentimes read as a certain kind of consent, unfortunately not only for the dance, but a certain kind of promise that there's an expectation that anything else happened after that dance, right? That like there's so much I think sexually, politically charged about that kind of proximity that you're giving us really beautiful language for. And I see that we technically have 2 minutes here, but there's one question that someone has asked, and that Farah has offered really great language for to complicate as well. And that is a question from Stephanie, who asks if you feel that there's a connection between camera operation and capturing a performance. And Farah added on by this really helpful language that the cinematographer is often super embodied and physical presence on set, and that some DPs talk about how the camera becomes an extension of their bodies in some ways. So the question of camera operation, capturing a performance, if you have any thoughts around that to close us out.
Yeah, I think the reason why I have to go back to Lovers Rock. I think the reason why Lovers Rock was such a sorry, please go away. That was turned on silent. I know what. Anyway, so the reason why Lovers Rock was such a success, I think, is because we were so blessed to have Shabir, who was our DOP on Lovers Rock. Now, Shabir is a phenomenal DOP. He's a great cameraman, and he literally, what was so beautiful about the way he worked the camera is that he wasn't afraid to get right inside of bodies. So he was like a human eye. And he didn't really, there's probably one time I said, okay, listen, when the camera comes through, don't look at the camera, obviously, but just be aware of it. So if you're dancing with your partner, just be aware of it. Don't feel that you've got to apologize moving. The camera will move around you. It will occupy space around you. And I think what Shabir did so beautifully about that is that he understood the physical language of what we were creating in that room.
Yeah.
And he was able to weave and duck and dive through bodies just like butter. You know, he was so phenomenal. And I think we were really blessed to have someone that really understood that eye, that lens that we were trying to capture. So I think, you know, obviously you kind of look on the monitor and you kind of go, okay, so I'm just going, okay, well, that hand needs to move down here or that shoulder needs to move around here. Because I was very interested in how, because obviously when you're doing TV, you're looking at close-ups. So all these little details are so important. So I was interested in looking at the back of a man's body, his spine move in a very kind of like S shape. I wanted to see all that winding happening in his anatomy as well as his hips, right? I want to see the movement coming through the shirt, through his trousers. The same with the women. I wanted to see that movement come through the clothes. It was really important so they understood moving from an inside level. So we get to see on camera that all those little nuances, like, you know, the forehead to forehead or the cheek to cheek moments, particularly with Martha and Franklin, played by Mara and Michael, when they're in I just remember the moment they're in the corner, the speaker is there and they're in the corner of the dance and our eye draws to them. And that's kind of their rites of passage moment where they're like, okay, we're as one now. We're in this dance and like we're locked. And I find what Shabir did there was so beautiful because he really captured this kind of love-making moment in such a beautiful way. The way it was lit, the way he held the camera on their faces, because everything was told through their face. You know, there's a moment where you just see their head, there's a headshot of them, and you can see and feel everything that they're feeling in that moment. And I just think it comes down to someone like Shabir, who's a Caribbean, who gets that, you know. And he also, he also went to Nottingham. Well, we all went to Nottingham Carnival. I went both days. He went the night before. So I think from being at Carnival, must have been in his steady level. So like, he was like, yeah, let's go, let's come, let's do this thing. Because I think it helps to kind of like party a little bit, you know what I'm saying? To get that real authenticity, for sure. Because sometimes you can't intellectualize these things. You have to feel them. You have to feel them. You can't always intellectualize it. And it's intellectualized in a very different way to what we're used to as human beings. You have to see it from a higher frequency.
Yeah. Well, this has been such an absolute treat to chat with you and to learn from you. Thank you so much for being here with us today and giving us language to live in around blackness, around movement, around intimacy. I think I can speak for the group that we can see and the group that we can't, that we're all super grateful for your company and for your wisdom. So thank you so much for joining us.
Amazing. Thank you so much for having me. It's been a pleasure.
And thank you, Farah, for everything. I don't know if you're on the screen, but we appreciate you.
Yes. Thank you, Farah. So good to see you.
Thank you. Oh, and Dave, actually, can you bring me on for a second? Thank you all. I wasn't going to come on here, but I just want to plug that we have the closing night party, which is outdoors on a rooftop called Kiss and Grind. So if you're feeling inspired, I know I am excited to wine later, just, you know, living in this conversation as well. So definitely.
Wine for me, please. Wine for me. My God.
Your spirit will be there.
Please do.
Yes. Thank you all so much.
Amazing.
Right. Thank you all.